She looks like an ordinary office worker, like thousands of others, but no one would have guessed that once, in high school, she disappeared without a trace, falling down a manhole. She opened her eyes in a completely different world, the Empire of the Cliffs, a strange country that bore no resemblance to her home. Everything here was different. The air, the people, even the silence. To survive, she had to do everything she could. By some miracle, she managed to accumulate startup capital, and with it, lay the foundation for a small trading business. Her business experience came in handy. Over time, this business grew into her own commercial empire. Her enterprise became the most successful in the country, and she became richer than the emperor himself. 10 years had passed. Since she had entered this world, the memory of Korea had faded like a distant dream. But for some reason, the girl returned home. When she opened her eyes, there was a white ceiling and a strong smell of medicine. She lay in her hospital bed, still in her school uniform, her mind in chaos. No answers, just a vague sense that something important had slipped away. She was worried about whether she would be able to adapt to this world again. But in the end, after studying, she got a job in an office. The boss of this company looked like a bald and cute fat guy, but he had the character of a tyrant. All the subordinates were afraid of this man, but not her. The girl solved any task, from talking to angry customers to booking a dinner table for the president in the shortest possible time. This wasn't new, considering she had her own trading guild before. Compared to the past, where her life was literally in someone else's hands, everything suddenly seemed easy and sweet. Everything around her looked like child's play. Her colleagues ran around like loaches in a hole near the boss, trying to please him. She even enjoyed working so hard. Now she could have lived her life to her heart's content, but she was killed. The girl had almost reached her home when she felt someone standing behind her. Suddenly, something sharp pierced her back. Blood poured from her body and gradually collected on the ground. Consciousness became clouded. Her legs gave out, and the girl fell to the ground. When she came to, she couldn't understand where she was, but the sensations she experienced were quite familiar. Opening the window, she saw a purple moon. The girl could not believe that she was back in the Empire of the Cliffs. Suddenly, she glanced at her reflection. That face! That wasn't her! 9 years have passed, and even more since the moment when the idea of the Utes Empire and my own business empire first appeared. And all this now seemed like a distant dream, for death had already separated one life from another. And then the incredible happened. She returned. She woke up in someone else's body. Closing the window, she stopped at the mirror. The reflection looked cold, almost detached. Long platinum hair fell in a waterfall, thin as ice. The face was pale, with clear, piercing features that resembled a winter lake. Suddenly, the door flew open, and a maid entered the room. Her steps were determined, but as soon as their eyes met, the girl stopped halfway. Her fingers trembled. She began to speak hurriedly, her voice bordering on despair. She complained that she had not received her salary for 5 months, but asked not to repay the debt, only to provide a letter of recommendation. He said that would be enough to find another place. Irritation was rising inside. But as soon as the maid disappeared behind the door, everything fell into place. This house belonged to aristocrats. She is the daughter of a noble family. But for some reason, the house looked deserted. No luxury, no furniture. When she went out into the lobby, she saw the same thing. Abandoned corridors, emptiness. She wandered through the rooms until she found herself in the office. It was a mess. Books and papers scattered on the floor, the walls covered in ink stains. On the table were piles of red papers with notes. These weren't just papers. These were traces of decay. Everything pointed to one thing. The family was drowning in debt. This was the reason for the maid's requests. Not everyone dared to demand wages from a house that was threatened with bankruptcy. A letter of recommendation could give him a chance to start over somewhere else. His gaze rested on the wallpaper patterns, flowers, deer, and beneath them, lines in the imperial language. The craziest family. There were only 3 people in the family: the Viscount, his wife, and his daughter. Intuition was right. She was that daughter, Yuri Krizia. But then a logical question arose. Where had the parents gone? To find the answer, I had to go back to the maid. She was still wandering the corridors, whispering to herself in a tense tone. She said the young lady was too fragile, taking on too much. Ever since her owners left her, something has happened to her mind. As she approached, she apologized for her unexpected appearance. The maid shuddered, looked around in fear, and then, with relief, recognized her. Her voice was shaky, her posture stiff. She didn't want to spend a long time choosing her words. The question simply popped out. Where are her parents? At the question, the maid's face turned gray. Pain appeared in her eyes, a crack in her voice. She could barely hold back her tears. My parents were gone. Both were dead. She pretended to have lost her memory and started asking questions about everything. This allowed her to better understand the situation she was in. The maid, named Errol, explained at length, speaking in a confused manner, but the gist turned out to be quite simple. The Viscount, known for his kindness and openness, entrusted the management of his fortune to an old friend. But that trust turned into betrayal. The estate found itself in a pit of debt. Every day brought a new collapse. The debt grew. Under the pressure of guilt and hopelessness, the Viscount finally committed suicide. And his wife, unable to bear the loss, died shortly after him. Whether from illness or a broken heart, no one knew for sure. The daughter was left alone in a half-destroyed house, without parents and without an inheritance. Errol recalled, it seemed as if the lady was also on the verge of life and death. The maid often repeated that it would be better to run away, leave this house and save herself. After all, if things continued like this, the mistress might simply be sold to pay off the debts. When the question of salary came up, Errol was embarrassed. Her voice trembled as she admitted, 5 months of delay is about 1 diamond. There was no complaint in her words, only fatigue and fear. But before she could even think about running away, she received an unexpected answer. The mistress firmly declared that she would pay the entire amount, if only Errol would not leave. Surprise, almost shock, appeared in the maid's eyes. She didn't even have time to object when she saw a confident smile in front of her. It wasn't the pale and devastated lady she remembered before. In a slightly apologetic tone, she asked if Errol had any money. But she just looked at him in surprise, not immediately understanding why the lady was asking such a question. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, she was already preparing to leave. The route was unusual. It was headed towards the Merchants' Guild. Errol tried to stop her, warning her that the only thing beyond was a shopping mall. The lady confirmed that that was where she had intended to go. The maid opened her mouth in confusion in response, but she hurried after him silently. Ahead rose a building, the tallest of all the surrounding buildings. Errol froze with a worried expression on her face as soon as she saw it. She still hoped that the lady would not dare to come in, that she would change her mind. But she calmly confirmed her intentions. And then Errol exclaimed almost with a shout, "This is Upper Cheshire!" The name rang like a bell from the past. A smile touched the girl's lips. This place was one of the most prestigious in the entire Empire of the Rocks. Even aristocrats were not allowed here without special permission. Despite all the persuasions, she approached the door, and it opened by itself. Glass, shiny, with a smooth movement in both directions. Errol cried out and, although reluctantly, followed. Looking around in rapture, the maid whispered, as if afraid to breathe loudly, "What is this, magic?" The lady nodded and went inside. The female administrator, noticing the new visitor, approached with a smile and asked how she could help. The guest replied that she had something important to report, the disappearance of the guildmaster. Her words elicited a mocking reaction from the man with long black hair. His voice was sharp, with a hint of distrust, and the gaze directed at her was cold and piercing. Mages called this stone the Demon's Eye. These mages feared people who could recreate spells using these stones. It was Upper Cheshire that made tools that worked with magic stones. The automatic doors that had just opened were also among such developments. True, she wasn't the one who created these ones. Their production was only planned, but then the studio's technical capabilities turned out to be insufficient, so the project was postponed. When the door opened again, a man walked in. She was sitting on the couch and looked at him carefully as he took a seat opposite her. The dark green eyes, the fair skin, the sharp, piercing gaze, the silver-rimmed glasses, everything remained the same. This was Leon Fenicis, the duke she had long wanted to meet. Their relationship had once been that of mistress and submissive, but later he had become closer to her than anyone else. That was why she had come here. She believed he would recognize her. He must have been 28 now. His body had become stockier, his voice deeper. The changes seemed natural, but there was something different about him. It was as if it was not his appearance that had changed, but his very essence. His voice, when he called her name, made her flinch. He spoke of the family's enormous debt, of how her efforts to pay it off were wrong. His face remained cold, his voice distant, as if every word was intended to break her from the inside. She felt every bone tremble, but she didn't look away. She didn't understand where such hostility came from, but she wasn't going to hide. Yuria just asked if he needed an informant. He laughed, sharply, almost contemptuously, as if he had heard an absurd joke. But the smile disappeared in an instant, and his eyes became icy again. He said, "It's been 7 years since the reward was announced. How many crooks have appeared since then? How many of them have dared to go this far?" She understood. When she disappeared, Leon had put a large reward on her. And seeing this, numerous adventurers began to look for her, or at least pretend to. And meanwhile, she was simply dead. Why she had never been found, why she had been presumed missing, remained a mystery. But she could not understand the mixture of hope and disappointment that he had experienced. And now, returning to the world with a body burdened with astronomical debt, she finally understood what the situation was from his side. Her intention was obvious, and at the same time hopelessly complicated. Leon stood up, as if he no longer had any desire to continue this conversation. His expression showed a final decision. To leave. To leave everything unanswered. But before he could leave the room, she spoke. Her voice was low but firm, making him stop. The words were too unexpected to pass over. Yuria said the same thing that someone had said before. She was not from this world. She came from another. Leon stopped, turned slowly. His gaze was cold and hard, as if directed at an old rusty scrap metal. But she felt that gaze and did not stop. Her fingers touched the empty cup. Even without tea, it was still the only point of support. He didn't believe it then, because he thought it was a fabrication, because he didn't know. But what seemed like a lie turned out to be the truth, she continued. About the ambush 7 years ago, when she was on her way to the kingdom of Migliore. He quickly approached her, grabbed her hand, without any control, so much so that it hurt. But she didn't flinch. She looked straight into his eyes, without fear. And then something appeared in his eyes that he couldn't hide. Confusion and anxiety. The fact that she knew a past that was supposed to remain a secret threw him off balance. She said that the girl died on the spot. But, opening her eyes, she returned to her native world, lived there for another 9 years, until she was killed, and then she woke up in the body of a woman. The woman's name was Yuria Krazia, a little unfortunate girl who lost her parents and was left with nothing. Leon turned pale. His eyes widened in shock. She reached her free hand toward the fireplace and groped for the hidden mechanism. Her fingers pressed, and the wall behind the fireplace began to move away with a dull thud. Behind her, a room that no one had ever seen before opened up. It was a secret space filled with treasures and purple magic stones. In the very center stood a safe, and instead of the usual stone, a pink one shimmered inside. A special one, capable of containing the soul of only one being. Leon followed her silently, his lips pursed. He watched her every move intently. She placed her hand on the stone. The body has changed, but the soul, unfortunately, has not. He knew this stone. He knew who it belonged to. The safe door clicked open, revealing not treasures, but papers. She took out a single document and handed it to Leon. It was an oath. Real, magical. Stronger than any contract, her name next to his. She promised to give him power, and in return, he would become her ally. It was proof. His hands trembled as he took the document. His gaze wavered, betraying an inner breakdown. His eyes searched for an answer, but instead met her calm, familiar gaze. And then she smiled. It's been a long time, Leo. He appeared in her life 4 years after she came into this world. He was 15 then, tired, wounded, and bloody. He had come to her for help because he had been drawn into a dirty power struggle. His parents had died, but he had miraculously survived. At that time, she had both wealth and influence, but she never interfered in the affairs of the nobility. Their games were exhausting, and the struggle for titles was endless. She had no desire to waste her energy on someone else's ambitions, as her life was already full of things to do. However, refusing to help this guy was also advantageous. This made it easier to maintain his reputation and attract clients. Therefore, his request for revenge against the uncle responsible for his parents' death was rejected. But Leon didn't leave. He became attached. And when she saw him, young, exhausted, with a look that still held hope, she felt sorry for him. Then she offered him a deal. She wouldn't help him get revenge, but she would make him a duke. In return, he would become her assistant. Leone didn't trust her right away. He suspected. He checked. He asked questions, looking for even a shred of confirmation of who she was. He asked her what drink she liked, and she answered, wine from Clarion, because she loved the fruits it smelled of, the same ones you could eat instead of a snack. He asked about the parrot, and she remembered his name, Leon. She chose him because of the same wine he didn't like, because it reminded her of his own name. Leon asked why she had been gone all these years, and she answered calmly. She had returned to her real world, where she had died again. And when she opened her eyes, she was already in a different body. As soon as she came to him. She asked him not to hold a grudge. Surprised, he asked if she had really died 7 years ago. Yes, that was when. But when he asked her if she remembered what those who were there were wearing, she just shook her head. Her face was covered. She couldn't remember, but something flashed in my memory. A robe. It had a raven embroidered on it. It was the only detail she remembered. And it was enough to make Leon's face turn pale. Leon ran his hand over his chin, contemplating the memories. The raven has long been associated with sorcerers. And the reason was simple. Those who possessed magic wore black robes when they cast their spells. In the darkness, their presence was lost, and the enemy did not have time to notice the danger lurking in the shadows. But this time, the image stood out differently. The white robe with the raven embroidered on it was an unusual combination that Leon had never heard of. The symbol caused him a sense of unease that was hard to hide. She remembered that her body had never been found. She had been reported missing. Leone's face clouded over at that moment. He searched for a long time. He looked around, focusing on the abandoned wagon she was supposed to be riding in. But there was no sign of her, and that was why he believed she might still be alive. Then he offered a reward. But instead of answers, only deceit and fraud came pouring in. There were those who wanted to get rich off someone else's tragedy. Leone bowed his head. He said nothing, but with every look, he seemed to admit guilt that he did not have. He felt that he was responsible for her death, because he sent her alone, because he wasn't there, and maybe he couldn't protect her. But she didn't share that. She believed that it wasn't his fault. She was accompanied by others. He had many responsibilities, and in that situation, he couldn't have done otherwise. She didn't let him blame himself any longer. That wasn't what she came for. She was interested in something else. What to do next? Leone answered firmly and without hesitation. Her seat was still empty. She could come back at any time. And this certainty brought a slight smile to her face. Others in his place would have taken advantage of her disappearance long ago. They would have taken a position, headed the structure, forgotten about her. But Leon did not do this. For all 7 years, he had only replaced her, without touching the main thing. Everything remained as she had left it. That's why he became special to her. A person you can trust without fear is more valuable than the most expensive artifact or contract. Such an ally is rare, and she knew it. She agreed. Her place was there, and it was time to return. Cheshire Peak was made by her hands. This place had belonged to her, once. But now everything had changed. There was no way to go back there now. She knew that, even though Leon had asked the question. Her gaze slid to the cup, her finger slowly touching its rim. The lack of qualifications was the answer. And Leon should have understood this better than anyone else. He was allowed to lead the staff at the top of Cheshire. Even under these circumstances, however, the transfer of power to an aristocrat without the proper status could have sparked gossip. Such a move would have been questionable, and its influence could easily have waned. Before she could reclaim her rights, she needed to claim the title. This required going through a procedure that was familiar and predictable, with two key steps. First, the consent of the majority of relatives. Then, a meeting with the emperor. Formally, the latter was only a ritual, but the former was of decisive importance. She thought for a moment, then looked at Leon. The debt was not to be paid immediately. It was part of a new plan. An idea was already brewing in her head, cunning and elegant at the same time, one that only she could dare to do. Leon stared at her silently. There was more than just surprise in his gaze. He slowly embraced her, cautiously, almost tremblingly, as if he were afraid she would disappear again. 7 years of fear of leaving her forever. 7 years during which he woke up with the thought that that morning might be his last, even if he grew up. Even though she looked younger than him now, deep down, he was still the same boy who had called out to her for help. She, staring at the ceiling, suddenly realized there was one more thing worth saying. A late thought made the corners of her mouth twitch slightly. She asked Leon for some money. Yuria sent letters to 9 families, along with a deposit. What was rightfully hers was to be returned. A week had passed since she met Leon again. There was not a moment of peace that day. In the morning, everything was in a whirlwind, and the reason was obvious. It was the day of the conference dedicated to the inheritance of the title of Viscountess. She descended to the second-floor lobby, where silence reigned for only a few moments. As she stepped onto the last step, the front door swung open, and a man entered the building. With his large belly protruding forward, he quickly looked around, and when he saw her, he immediately rushed towards her. He exclaimed something joyful, called her niece, spread his arms as if preparing for a sincere embrace. But he looked more like a beaten boar, steamy, sweaty, with a gleam in his eyes that caused disgust. She took a step to the side, delicately, almost casually, avoiding a collision. The man must have expected a hug, and was not prepared for the fact that he would be given the way. He stumbled, staggered, and could barely stay on his feet. Yuria met his gaze, bewildered, surprised, and responded with a wide, warm smile, hiding irony and guilt at the same time. The greeting was flat, almost formal. She called him Uncle Yella, inviting him into the apartment with the same reserved hospitality with which she had just avoided his embrace. He arrived late, as expected. There was a look of remorse on his face, but his words sounded rehearsed. He said he regretted not having arrived earlier, but he had important matters to attend to that prevented him from arriving on time. He asked for understanding. She already knew that was what she would hear. Her cold gaze lingered on him, but a polite smile still played on her lips. Yuria invited him in, and he hesitantly agreed. Led by Errol, he headed into the conference room, and as soon as the door closed behind him, the smile immediately disappeared from her face. She had prepared carefully for this day. She had reviewed all the entries in the Noble Almanac, researched the archives left behind by the Viscount, and studied each of the 8 families who were to participate in the meeting. Among them is a bald, overweight man, Count Yellow, her uncle. Even if one were to consider Viscount Krasia naive, it is hard to imagine that he would entrust all his possessions to his friend out of kindness. Maybe there was a third person, a bridge between trust and betrayal, someone very close, someone you wouldn't suspect. In the meeting room, all 8 families had already placed their representatives. They were sitting around a large table, and her place was left by the door. Yella was the first to speak. He expressed his condolences for the death of his brother and his wife. The others picked up the subject, feigning grief. In response, a faint, contemptuous smile appeared on Yuria's face. No genuine regret, just pretense mixed with hidden pride. In their eyes, she was just a hothouse flower, fragile, dependent, easy to deal with. Count Yelu, with a sly pout, spoke about her future. She hadn't taken the proper succession course, they said, and he offered an alternative. He said, "It's better for him, uncle, to take power. She doesn't have to worry about debts. Everything has already been thought out." He said it with the same intonation with which one gives candy to a child. All she knew how to do as a child was knit. That was how they imagined her, weak, incapable of running a business or politics. He assured her again that he would take care of her future. Then she asked how he was going to take care of her, and he, with the smile of a hunter who had already tightened his noose, explained he would marry her off, settle her in a decent house, and provide her with a dowry. She would live quietly like a lady, and her uncle would do all the hard work. The words about a sophisticated life and a well-ordered family were the last straw. The smile disappeared instantly. Yuria met his gaze without a drop of tenderness, only with icy hostility. His shoulders shook at the change in mood. But she didn't care. The Count spoke again, as if he had finally thrown off his mask. He said that she shouldn't even dream of a title, that she wasn't ready, and that no inheritance was worth a girl in debt taking on the reins. He also mentioned her father. He said that he had been too trusting since his youth. That was why he had been deceived. And he added, he said that he, Yelu, would never have allowed something like that to happen. She agreed that her father was soft, and that perhaps he shouldn't have trusted a person so much, even if it was his own brother. This happened at the very moment when he was confused by an unexpected answer. Suddenly, there was a noise outside the door, and 5 or 6 armed knights burst into the hall. Heavy footsteps in armor, the sharp crunch of steel, and the entire room froze. The representatives, who had been sitting in their supreme confidence a moment earlier, now looked around in confusion. The armor of the newcomers bore the emblem of the empire, not the coat of arms of any particular family, but a sign that meant one thing. Before them stood not ordinary soldiers, but noble judges. These people operated beyond the authority of any house. Even the imperial family had no right to influence their decisions. They were feared, they were respected. Their appearance always meant something terrible. One of the judges walked slowly across the room, his steps heavy in his armor. His gaze swept over the audience, stopping at Count Yelu. He got nervous and abruptly tried to move towards the exit, but the door was already closed. There was no way out. The judge called out his name and a list of charges: fraud, embezzlement, murder of a relative. The Count mumbled something incomprehensible in confusion, trying to justify himself, but the words only got tangled in his mouth. His eyes darted around the room in search of salvation, but instead they met her gaze. Cold, indifferent, almost alien. He was accused of fraud, betraying the trust of a close friend, misappropriating property through forged documents. But that wasn't all. The main charge was murder. Her mother. When he was brought to his knees, he looked at her, his eyes burning with anger mixed with fear. Her mother died the same day the Count visited the estate. The death was officially ruled a sudden cardiac arrest, but it was later revealed that poison was found in the IV. Coincidentally? No. The drug purchase reports listed Yelu's name. His method was crude, carelessly thought out. The Count obviously didn't care much. He believed he was dealing with a naive, weak girl, the way everyone thought she was, but she turned out to be different. After her mother died, something changed in her. She decided to figure it out. She found old letters that sounded more like threats than concern. She reread them with cold calculation, remembering each of the Count's visits to the house. And when Errol confirmed that the Count had indeed been at the estate on that tragic day, she realized it was no coincidence. Yuria ordered Leon to send the EFI to the lab. The findings were undeniable. Toxic substances. The crime was traced back to a source, and that source had a specific name. The substance was rarely purchased, and Count Yelu was the only one who had ordered it in recent years. He was too self-confident, too convinced that she was just a fragile figure without influence or power. But she was no longer the same Yuria, the Krasia that everyone thought she was. Count Yelu stood in the center of the room, filled with silent fury. His eyes, clouded with anger, did not take their eyes off her. She, unmoved, smiled broadly and almost playfully as if in farewell. It was the last smile he saw from her, and it tasted like a sentence. According to the law, murder was considered a capital crime. It was followed by the loss of his title, the confiscation of all his property, without the right of appeal. And for Count Yelu, this moment had come. He was dragged out of the room, poles le siège, twisted. But he resisted until the judges led him out of the building, coldly, decisively, without compassion. The silence that followed the storm seemed almost strange. She was about to return to her relatives when she noticed that there was still someone left in the hall. One of the judges was in no hurry to leave. The gaze from under the heavy helmet was fixed on her. She bowed her head slightly, showing respect, and then remembered something, and smiled softly. His shoulders shook slightly, as if from the unexpected words. She thanked him, because it was thanks to this stranger that her parents could finally find peace. The judge didn't answer. He just turned around abruptly and left the hall without looking back. Her gaze followed him with astonishment. A strange figure, as if from another world. But the performance didn't end there. She turned to her relatives again. One by one, their faces were frightened, pale. Their eyes were downcast. She counted them out on her fingers, barely audible, as if summing up the final act. An even number. That was alarming. A majority was needed to pass a decision, but now there was a possibility of a tie. She understood that, but for now she kept her thoughts to herself. Her relatives, meeting her gaze, shuddered. They were not afraid of the judges or the loud scandal. They were afraid of her. And it was a new, difficult fear, one that remained even behind closed doors. Silence fell in the hall. Yuria stood in the middle, calm as a shadow before a storm, waiting. Her gaze swept over the faces of her relatives, those who, just a few minutes ago, had been ready to pretend not to know her name. No one dared to take the first step. No hand flew up, but indecision mixed with fear until the first hand, cautious and shackled, rose into the air. After it, another, then another, Duhai of Fienices, its patron, who promoted the activities of the noble judge. The emergence of the noble judge was associated with a denunciation from Leon, who belonged to the most powerful family, Phoenicis, the power that Leon was able to gain through his family, his influence as a representative, and deputy of the merchant guild. Now he has so much wealth that he is able to shake the market of the empire. This means that Yuri has the most reliable assistant behind her back. After her successful meeting with Leon, the first thing she did was pay off her debts, using the compensation she received from her uncle. She also decorated the estate with jewels from the guild's secret vault, and she also generously rewarded Errol for her work. She bought carriages, horses, and significantly increased the maid's salary. But she blinked her eyes in confusion, not understanding how she had deserved such generosity. The girl looked stunned, as if the world around her had momentarily shifted off its axis. She greeted Leon without any ceremony. She felt that it would be unnecessary to talk in the living room, where people were constantly moving around, so she led him to her room. The looks that followed them were filled with silent surprise. To outsiders, it all had a subtext. A man and a woman, both unmarried, meeting like this, unaccompanied. But she didn't care. Many years had passed. Too many. Leon, standing nearby, suddenly lowered his head. She caught a faint scent as he approached, but the next moment he had already moved away a little. Yuria opened the door and gestured for him to come in. Still a little confused, but trying not to show it, she stepped into the room first. He followed her in and closed the door. His first words, as he surveyed the space, were about the size of the room. It was too small. She just shrugged. That was enough for her. Her quarters had once taken up an entire floor in Cheshire, and in Korea she had once bought a room measuring 16.5 square meters. Compared to that, it seemed quite acceptable. Of course, Leon knew nothing about her past life. Perhaps if he had known, he would have become softer, more considerate. In appearance, he was a real duke with an icy face that melted only in front of her. Yuria was the only one who had seen him without his mask. A guardian, a companion, a silent presence in his past. Leon invited her to return to the guild, but she had told him before, if she were sitting on top now, there would always be those who would question her ability. He understood. When a mistress makes a decision, it should be accepted, and he accepted. Without further ado, Leon got down to business without delay, saying exactly what she wanted to hear. According to him, the level of purchasing activity in the magical tools market has been steadily increasing, the main buyer of Cheshire's products. But over the past 3 years, export activity has also been particularly active. The kingdom of Oshan, which had little understanding of magic, showed an unexpectedly positive response. It managed to capture over 70% of the market, an impressive figure even against the backdrop of overall growth. According to Leon's report, the Cheshire magic tool merchant's business was doing surprisingly well. Particularly notable was the successful expansion abroad. She praised him for his efforts. He had indeed come a long way, and it deserved recognition. She couldn't help but smile as she looked at him. The thought of him always made her feel warm and good. Leonie, sensing her mood, asked, "What does she plan to do next? And does she intend to finally reveal her true identity?" The only response was a silent shake of the head and a bitter smile. She had no intention of returning to her old name. When it returned, it would be said that she was dead. Leon denied it almost immediately. Certainly, without a shadow of a doubt. He knew, as she did, that he wouldn't believe it. And he added something else. He remembered how he had once disliked that guy. Indeed, his attitude towards the newcomer was sharply cool. And now it became clear why. Heckard seemed too similar to him. In age, in circumstances, in the fact that they had both been saved by the director himself. He was afraid that he would overshadow him, become closer to her than he was. She listened with surprise, not previously suspecting such roots of old emotions. But even if Heckard didn't believe in the master's death, the truth couldn't be revealed. To say that the soul was in another body would only confuse things even more. Leon had to pretend he didn't know anything. Furthermore, members of the royal family of Lukdem had eyes capable of seeing the very essence of the soul. However, Heckard's illegitimate status left such an ability in doubt. Leonie nodded, and with a sigh, admitted that it would be best to completely conceal the master's true identity. Leonie was silent for a long time, but then he sighed and spoke. He seemed not to want to worry her with unnecessary words, but he admitted that there were things she should know about. His voice was quiet, almost indistinct, but there was a weight of anxiety in it that he had been carrying for a long time. For the past 3 years, someone had been searching for her. The mysterious stranger, hiding his face under a white cloak, remained elusive, despite Leon's attempts to capture him and interrogate him. But he used magic, a clear sign that he was a sorcerer. This fact alarmed her. The wizard in the white cloak was an image that evoked associations with those who were behind her death 7 years ago. They, the enemies who despised her for creating magical tools, were gone, but not forgotten. If it was really them, it's best to stay in the shadows. At least until it becomes clear why they returned now, 3 years after their disappearance, and not immediately after their death. The atmosphere in the room was growing increasingly tense, so she decided to change the subject. She remembered the message she had received the day before. She was supposed to report to the palace in a month. It was about the succession of the title, a formality that could not be avoided. Leon immediately offered to accompany her, but she only smiled softly and shook her head in denial. She had no choice but to agree. The next day, the carriage he had sent arrived at the gate. A woman appeared on the threshold of the estate, wearing a uniform that exuded a restrained but tangible strength. She presented herself calmly, clearly, with impeccable posture. Hilary Evot is a knight sent by order of Duke Leone Phoenicis himself to protect Lady Uria. Cressia. She bowed and said that she was ready to serve when needed. Her voice was flat, without a hint of emotion, as were her reddish-brown eyes, which seemed cold and empty, as if a concentrated silence was hidden somewhere deep behind a stone shell. She resembled a mechanical doll, devoid of any inner fire. Standing next to her was Errol, the personal maid, who, without losing her self-confidence, immediately raised her voice and introduced herself as the senior maid of the house. With her chin proudly raised, she looked at the newcomer, completely oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. Hilary nodded briefly in return, acknowledging her with words of politeness. Uria moved forward, and the 2 women, Hilary and Errol, followed her. Suddenly, Errol asked if the lady was really leaving already. With a curt gesture, Uria instructed the maid to look after the estate. She has not yet become Countess Uria Cressia, but the journey that would change her title and perhaps her fate had only just begun. The girl thought that the coronation ceremony would be quiet and without force majeure. However, on the way, her carriage shook violently. It was an attack. Uria was horrified that this was probably another attempt to kill her. As it turned out, a child had run out under the wheels of the carriage. Hilary asked Uria to stay inside until she could sort it out. The groom tried to chase the child away, but it only curled up on the ground and had no intention of backing down. Yuria came closer and noticed a young girl in front of her, looking about 13 to 14 years old. The girl's hair was light pink, her eyes were the same color, and she herself looked terrible. She was all dirty. She began to ask for help, saying that her younger sister could not eat normally for a long time, and if this continued, she would die. Yuria asked the stranger if she was okay. The girl assured her that, unlike her brother, she was fine. After all, he was weak from birth. Since they have no money, they cannot afford proper treatment. The girl bent down to the ground, hoping that this would help her. Then she noted that she did not require selfless help because she could become a slave for Yuria. All the girl wanted was to get help for her younger brother. Yuria couldn't leave everything like that. However, she couldn't give the money in front of everyone. After all, she knew that as soon as she left, the girl would be robbed. Meanwhile, not far away, behind the wall, two men were watching them. They tried to be inconspicuous. The groom remarked that he also felt sorry for the stranger, but they had to leave now. Yuria approached the girl so that only she could hear her words. She handed the stranger a VIP card. Then she told her to go to the trading guild and show the card there, and then they would help her. Yuria noted that this was a gift for her courage. She also emphasized that there were a lot of eyes here, so the girl should go faster. This VIP card is from Leone personally, so he will recognize it and help the girl. Eventually, Yuria returned to the carriage. She noticed a certain hostile atmosphere emanating from Hillary. The knight stated that they should have punished the girl for getting in their way, but instead, Yuria helped her. Initially, Hillary was a homeless woman who fell into the hands of a slave trader. At a young age, she was sold into a circus troupe. She was given no education and was not even explained the safety measures. Instead, they were forced to perform inhumane acts. When Hillary grew up, the circus decided they no longer needed her. They sold her to a group of mercenaries. The mercenaries always sent her to the front lines as a human shield, but the girl withstood all the attacks and even learned to wield a sword. During one of the expeditions, she was noticed by Leon. That's how she ended up next to Yuri. It is logical that she does not know what good is that she never received. Yuria admitted that she helped that girl because she could. Hillary only sighed in response. Yuria looked out the window. Suddenly, memories flooded her mind. Something similar had happened before, about becoming a slave. One of her business partners once took Yuria to a slave auction. She was determined to break the contract of a certain slave. A boy entered the scene. It's clear that she took him under her wing. In return, the boy promised that when he grew up, he would always be by her side. He confessed that he liked her. Finally, Yuria reached the imperial palace. She confidently entered the audience hall and introduced herself. The emperor did not look up as he was busy with papers, but the girl was able to see the beauty of his highness. Silver hair, as if dyed by moonlight. Sharp facial features, indifferent cold red eyes. But despite this attractiveness, he was already annoying Yuria. After all, she had been waiting at least a minute for the emperor to pay attention to her. The girl believed that receiving the title was just a formality, so such a procedure should not take long. But she was wrong. The emperor asked her whether she was really worthy of this title. The emperor only deals with worthy people. If Yuria becomes a viscountess, she will become his vassal, and therefore, she must deserve this title. The former emperor established friendly relations with the Cheshire Merchant Guild. Thanks to the power of magical artifacts, their empire greatly surpassed other countries in technological progress. But the emperor is not a saint at all. He has already earned himself the name of a warmonger. Thanks to his bloodthirsty attacks and conquests, the territory of the Utes Empire has expanded. As a result, there were a large number of victims, one of which was the Kingdom of Luckdom. The one who cut off the head of the former emperor and seized the throne himself was now Kaishan Euclid Cliff. He is the illegitimate child of a former emperor. Rumors have spread that he hid his identity until he led a rebellion. Now, after a period of chaos, Kaishan is considered the most just and benevolent ruler. Yuria wondered what kind of person he really was. The first thing she noticed was that he was difficult to manipulate. His Highness didn't stand on ceremony with the guest and showed her the way out if she didn't say anything. Yuria pointed to the pen His Highness was using. It turned out to be from the small kingdom of Ethan. Such pens are very popular. It is quite an exquisite item. The nib inserted into the handle is woven from the stem of Clarkfula, known for its flexibility and strength, and is decorated with a golden peacock feather. They say that after him, you won't pick up another pen. The price for them is quite high, but the demand still doesn't fall. Nowadays, you can say that they have a monopoly, but on the other hand, there is little competition. As literacy among the population grows, such pens are in demand, and the quantity of such products is limited. Therefore, the prices of Ethan pens have increased. Yuria noted that when there is a shortage, the market loses its flexibility. His Highness had no choice but to listen to the girl. It has been 3 years since Kaishan became emperor, and things in the empire have stabilized. He needs to demonstrate this to both the aristocrats and the common people. And it is also necessary to achieve significant economic results on behalf of the royal family through its active activities. The emperor pointed out that it was not easy to create a pen that everyone would like. They could not waste money and time on something uncertain. There is a thin line between business and gambling. Yuria proposed creating a high-quality pen without large expenses and materials. Kaishan was interested, but he didn't believe it was possible. The girl bowed her head and said that she wasn't brave enough to joke in front of the emperor. In this way, Yuria wanted to show her importance. His Highness carefully examined the girl, after which he noted that she reminded him of someone. The results of the agreement should be after the banquet, and until then, the emperor had let Yuri go. The girl also thought that she had already seen it somewhere, although she did not rule out the possibility that it was simply a figment of her imagination. It was late at night, and Kaishan was drinking wine alone. His thoughts were tormenting him. He had not become emperor to look at small papers. She disappeared 3 years after he left the magic tower. Kaishan started searching for her too late, so he found no trace. The same goes for the body. He searched for it everywhere he could. However, he only encountered defeat. He needed a broad information system and power that could encompass the entire empire. That's why he actually became emperor, and all in order to find the leader of the Cheshire Merchant Guild. But Kaishan did not budge from his dead spot. A person in a black robe came to His Highness to report the results of the search. They searched the entire empire, but still without result. There is an assumption that the head of the guild could be sold, so they searched for her in slave traders, brothels, and even mines. Kaishan, grabbing his head, ordered to expand the search area beyond the borders of the empire. If that doesn't work, the entire continent will have to be searched. His Highness was eager to find her. He also ordered that his eyes be kept on Duke Phoenicis. After all, if the head turns, it will immediately go to him. Kaishan leaned back in his chair and began to think. For him, Yuria turned out to be a brave woman. He did not expect that she would be able to prove her worth. And looking at such a determined personality, he immediately remembered the one he was so desperately looking for. However, they are not at all similar in appearance. The emperor believes that the lady will attend tomorrow's banquet. That is where they will meet again. Yuria tried on a blue dress. The maids were delighted with their mistress's appearance. The men at the event also appreciated her. But the girl had no intention of even making small talk. She was savoring the Clarion wine, which she had been able to drink for a long time. Yuria planned to meet influential people. For example, Count Livrando had recently achieved considerable success in trade. Next to him stood the heir to the Rakta family, famous for its paper technology. Soon, the guests of honor, Carlos and Carlaya, arrived at the event. Velvet family are large businessmen who own numerous businesses. In terms of level, they are second only to the Cheshire Guild. Without the creation of magical items, the Cheshire Guild would have had a hard time competing with Velvet. After the head disappeared, the Velvet family significantly strengthened its position. This led Yuri to think that Duke Velvet was probably the one who organized the assassination attempt on her. Carlia Velvet is very intelligent. She always took first place in the academy. She was considered a genius next to Leon. But her brother was another problem. They say the Duke is ill, so only his children showed up for the banquet. If Carlia becomes the head of the family, Yuri will have many problems. While the girl was contemplating her situation, she overheard a conversation between two young ladies. Rumor has it that Carly is looking for a groom. And this is finally the official announcement that she will not be the head of the Velvet family. And given the Duke's conservative views, that might be true. Although Yuria is sure that Carlia won't just agree to the marriage. Of Hayes appeared. Haynes? He is the head of the Duchy of Haynes, a family that is famous among the three ducal houses for its magic. Hayes inherited this title 12 years ago after the disappearance of his older brother. Wolfgang Haynes is the first son of the Haynes family, a great wizard who was also a prominent archmage. He was the pride and symbol of the Haynes family. It was Wolfgang who was supposed to become the head of the family. However, when the previous head died and it was time for Wolfgang to take over, he suddenly disappeared. Therefore, Hayes became the head of the Haynes family. According to Leon, the Haynes family has been behaving suspiciously lately. Yuria noticed that Heise wasn't taking his eyes off her. A moment later, someone came up to her and grabbed her hand. It was Leon. Although it was unexpected for Yuria, she didn't pay much attention to it. She immediately noticed Leon's earrings. It was a gift from Yuria. She gave it to Leon when he first joined the guild, so they are old. Yuri still remembers how Leon came to her room because he couldn't sleep. The man was embarrassed, so he asked her not to mention it. The girl just smiled in response. Leon had trouble sleeping due to his injury, so Yuria made him a talisman that would ward off nightmares. Yuria joked that Leona had started addressing her by her first name, and therefore he was no longer addressing other girls so formally. Since a lot of time had passed, he could have found a girlfriend for himself. However, Leon had a different opinion. He grabbed Yuria by the shoulders and loudly declared that he couldn't allow this, especially when she disappeared. After which, the girl apologized for saying such nonsense. Leon, in turn, apologized for startling her. He felt it would be awkward if he kept the atmosphere formal between them. The man bowed to Yuria and asked how he should address her. The girl nodded slightly and noted that she should simply address him by his first name. Leon knew she would answer like that, so he couldn't help but smile. Yuria wondered where he had suddenly appeared. But as soon as Leon arrived at the banquet, he immediately went to look for her. Finally, His Highness Kaishan arrived. He looked majestic as usual, although the severity did not leave his face. The emperor greeted everyone and thanked them for coming to his banquet. At this time, he looked around the hall. His gaze fell on Yuri, and a noticeable smile appeared on his face. The girl asked if Leon could be at the event. He replied that he should be where she was, especially since she was eating sweets again, even though she had promised not to do so. Yuria noticed that he had become more grumpy with age. She even turned away so that Leon wouldn't bother her, but she noticed Heise's insistent gaze on her. The girl asked Leon what he knew about this man. However, he knows exactly what everyone else knows, but he can find out more. From trifles to relationships, it wouldn't hurt to know all this. Yuria also noted that it is necessary to extend the contract for the magic mine. Soon, a waiter approached Leon to inform him that His Highness wanted to see him. Yuria glanced at Kaishan. He wanted to talk to Leon, but at the same time he couldn't take his eyes off Yuria. This worried her. Yuria went out onto the balcony to relax. The beautiful night sky and pleasant breeze contributed to this, but soon she was joined by William Ackerman. They were supposedly friends with Yuri at the academy. The girl has no idea who it is. She is sure that she left the banquet unnoticed and does not understand how she was tracked down. Yuria was about to leave the balcony when William grabbed her hand. The man didn't expect such a reaction. After all, they were the main couple at the academy. It's true that he cheated on Yuria once, but he doesn't consider it a big deal. He thought about it for a long time and assures that he's sorry. Moreover, Yuria has become even more attractive. And during the academy, the girl looked sickly. Yuria did not try to clarify the relationship and poured wine in her husband's face. William clutched his face. The girl didn't care about the past. She wanted him out of her way. And if he touched her again, he wouldn't get away with it. If you get soda in your eyes, they will hurt for a long time. Before Yuria could leave, William grabbed her by the hair. He was furious and wanted to make her an obedient girl. Yuria fell from surprise and was ready to retreat. Taking off her heel, the girl planned to defend herself, but at that moment, an angry Hayes flew onto the balcony. Seeing the Duke, William was frightened and ran away. The appearance of Heise confused Yuria, and even more so his desire to help her. Julia put the shoe back on and said that Heise shouldn't have been so stressed. But in the end, she thanked him. The man was surprised. Anyway, the girl almost got into trouble. If the Duke had been even a little late, she would have hit William with her heel. Yuria decided not to go around in circles and immediately asked if they knew each other. After all, Heise hadn't taken his eyes off her all evening. The girl was surprised to hear a negative answer. Heise allegedly accidentally saw a suspicious man following Yuria. It seems that there is a personal sympathy hidden behind this. If Yuria becomes the head of the guild, she will often move around with Duke Haynes, so it is better for them to get closer. This time he helped her, and next time she is ready to offer him her help. Since she wants to thank Haizu, but it is not worth doing this suddenly, she simply warns him. The man agreed, after which Yuria bowed and left. Leon, noticing the girl, quickly rushed towards her. He was very excited because he had been looking for her everywhere. Yuria hugged Leon and assured him that she wouldn't go anywhere. The Duke asked permission to protect her this time, and Yuria agreed. At that moment, a mysterious figure was watching them. Yuria stood anxiously at His Highness's door. He would either allow her to inherit the title or not. There was no other choice. Kaishan sat on the throne and looked sternly at the girl. Then he ordered her to come closer. After a short pause, the emperor announced his decision. Yuri could inherit the title. From now on, she is subject to His Highness, Viscountess Yuri Crazius. The girl bowed her head before the emperor and swore allegiance. Kaishan asked Yuria what her relationship was with Leon, whether they were lovers. The girl was confused, but at the same time the puzzles were coming together. The mysterious figure was probably the emperor himself. Anyone could have misunderstood them. Her relationship with Leon is not bad. They have a special bond. Kaishan sighed and, without looking into her eyes, declared that he didn't care about her relationship. She had received approval, so she could be free. Yuria stood silently, pondering the emperor's intentions. He might not have called her to him if he was only going to give permission. She thought Kaishan would at least ask for her pen, but he only asked about the Duke. It was obvious that he was really worried about it. Yuria tried to start a conversation about the pen, but the emperor, rising from the throne, merely walked past her. He said he would hear about it later. Now that Yuria has been granted the title of Viscountess, she can return to the guild. Leon planned to convene a board of directors in the near future, but the girl assured her that there was no need to do this. After all, she wanted to join the guild as an intern. This is the lowest position in the guild. The plan was simple. She would become an intern to uncover the most pressing issues from within. Leon asked him to promise that if Yuri became the chairman, he would make him his assistant again. The guild's admission process became stricter. Those who carried out the attack on the head hid in advance on the carriage route. Its schedule was declassified. It is obvious that there are traitors in the Cheshire Guild. Accordingly, we cannot hastily expand the number of board members, and this way of joining the guild would be the best option for Yuria. Yuria looked at the list, where the name Hicard was displayed. Lukedom. She hoped that the guy was doing well now. The girl doesn't know if Hicard has the ability to see other people's souls, so she intends to be careful, because she doesn't need to reveal her identity to anyone else. After dying here, she returned to her previous body. Maybe if she was killed here again, she would definitely die. But no matter what happens, this time she will not die. The red-haired boy caught the attention of the guild's trainees, saying he had urgent news. But his comrades didn't want to listen to him, because Kilaban often makes a big fuss out of nothing. One of the interns said that if it wasn't something important, then after work, Kilaban would clean up. But he's sure his news is great, and that means his friends will be cleaning up for the whole next week. Kilaban whispered that a new intern would be joining them from today, but the boys didn't think it was such a big deal. But according to the red-haired young man, the new intern is none other than Leon Finis's lover. This is what really shocked everyone. On the way to the kingdom of Milior, Yuri was killed by strangers in white cloaks with a raven emblem. When she opened her eyes, she was once again an 18-year-old high school student. In other words, consciousness disappears, but the body remains unchanged. In that case, the corpse of the guild leader must still remain. Her soul was gone, but her body could not dissolve into thin air. Since Leon was unable to find her remains, even with the help of magical tools, the body remained unburied. One thing remains. It was destroyed so that not even a trace remained, or it was hidden somewhere where no one would find it. If the traitor was among the highest ranks of the guild, then the reason is unlikely to be simple resentment or revenge. Yuria doesn't know what they're planning, but if it involves her, she can't sit idly by. Yufan Alexia is in charge of the trainees in the guild. She immediately warned that she would be careful with Yuria. You have to get used to this. Aside from Yufan, most of the guild members would probably feel awkward around the girl. It seemed like they weren't too comfortable with her presence here. The woman offered him some tea. It was made from the leaves of the locara plant, which they had recently purchased from a tribe in the Alka mountain range. This drink is made especially for the higher ranks of the guild. Given Yuria's connection to the deputy head of the guild, Yufan hopes for her honest and thoughtful assessment. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to respond to provocation in moderation. But still, Yuria remains silent. Due to the harsh and dangerous terrain, the only tribe living in the Alka Mountains is the Ron tribe. They sell rare plants that don't grow much outside those mountains. Yuria also tried to find those plants at one time, but even experienced explorers avoid that place. It turns out that the guild has made a deal with the Ron tribe and is now purchasing Lokar from them. This is only possible due to the current state of the Cheshire Guild. The moment these tea leaves appear on the shelves, the empire will shake again. This was, of course, to be expected from the Cheshire Guild. Yuria took a sip of tea. She smelled the faint but exquisite aroma of wildflowers. The drink was delicious, but something still spoiled the taste. Regular tea leaves usually undergo an oxidation process during processing. This is a necessary procedure. Otherwise, the flavor will not be as rich. But this applies to black tea. Green tea is not as popular, so the demand for it is not high. Unlike black tea, green tea has antioxidant properties that inhibit oxidation. And apparently, the drying process is more suitable for these tea leaves than oxidation. Yufan seemed to have a light on her. She stood up abruptly, saying she had urgent matters to attend to. The woman started a conversation to lighten the atmosphere. But many on their team noticed that the tea was lacking something. They were doing research, but they never mentioned drying the leaves. And now there was hope. Yuri was taken to the intern's dormitory. 2 people live in each room. Everyone eats in the dining room. At 7 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and 7 in the evening. The girl entered the room and stopped in confusion when she saw her neighbor. Meanwhile, Yufan was testing a new way to process the leaves. The researchers were delighted and praised the woman for this idea. She sternly placed the cup on the table and said that she was not the one who brought this about. The confession came out clearly. She was the deputy's lover. Then Yufan suddenly changed her mind and said that it was Yuria Krazia. At first, she thought that Yuria had joined the guild through an acquaintance, but the girl turned out to be much better than she expected. Yuria's neighbor turned out to be the homeless girl who once threw herself under her carriage. She was extremely happy to meet the Viscountess. Her face lit up with a sincere smile. That day, the girl risked her life to feed her younger sister. Yuria extended her hand to her and saved them. Because she was afraid of the nobles, she didn't believe in that card. But she was ready to give her life for her sister. Full of courage and determination, the girl headed to the guild. She entered a place that was completely unsuitable for her. Leah was the girl's name. She handed the map to Leon, then fell to her knees and begged him to help her. The girl was ready to do anything, work hard and even starve, just to feed her sister. Leon ordered Mr. Ozel to take Leah's sister to the doctor and send the girl herself to an internship at Yufan. It was an unusual situation that not everyone agreed with. Some interns shunned it. But thanks to her hard work, the girl managed to settle in here for a while. Her younger sister, Tia, was treated at the guild hospital. If it weren't for Yuri, Leah wouldn't have been able to save her sister. That's why she desperately wanted to meet him and thank him. The girl handed the Viscountess money, but she refused to accept it. Then Leah began to insist on serving Yuria. Since Leah didn't go through the usual selection process, she didn't have a good time in the guild. Yuria brought this girl here herself, so she must bear responsibility for her. If she is around, she will be able to adapt faster. Yuria asked for a favor in exchange for money or help. Leah was ready for anything, but the Viscountess only needed an ally. The girl is confused. She doesn't believe that someone like her could become an ally of the Viscountess. But having someone around gives you strength. Another way to call an ally is a friend. Yuria handed over a gift in honor of their friendship. It was a carefully folded handkerchief. Now Leah will address her not as Mrs. or Viscountess, but as sister. This was unexpected for the girl, but she accepted the gesture with warmth. Yuria and Leah were walking down the dormitory corridor. The girl was talking about other interns. Kiliban is always causing trouble. Rudin is kind and strong. Annie is very sweet. But if Yuria does something wrong, she will have a hard time. Annie is closer to Leah than anyone else. But she likes Yuri the most. After all, it was she who saved both her and her younger sister. But there were also some to be careful with. Manani Karen. Leah had heard from other interns that he was the younger son of the Count of Cleves. He had grown up in luxury, so he did not recognize any hierarchy. It's hopeless to argue with him, so it's best to avoid him like something that stinks. This reminded Yuria of something. The Count of Cleves had made a fortune selling high-quality fabrics. They had become rich quickly, but they had not learned manners. He is a typical son of a rich family. Manani is especially cruel to Coco. Coco, although from a noble family, has lost her status. In such cases, action is necessary from the superiors. But because everyone is very busy, no one deals with the interns. Manani once again abused Coco. He demanded money from him because Coco allegedly soiled his designer shirt. He said he would pay him his salary for 6 months. After that, he made Coco polish his shoes with her tongue until they were shiny. The situation looked disgusting, so Yuria couldn't help but intervene. Freya's shirts are characterized by more voluminous sizes and a modest neckline with a slit in the middle. And the neckline should have a branded stitching, which Yuria had not seen in Manan. The guy got angry and said that this was supposedly a new collection, and Yuria knew nothing at all. The Viscountess grabbed Manani by the shirt and pulled her towards her. The boy began to make even more noise and scare her with his father. Yuria looked at the tag and discovered that it was not Freya, but Frima. All the interns were shocked. Yuria was feasting on her favorite dishes. There were plenty of sweets on the table. Anyone who looked would have understood that it was Leon's handiwork. Leah's student and closest friend, Annie Pluck, didn't think Yuria was that way. She thought she was arrogant. However, when she brought Yufan to save Coco, it turned out that the situation had already been resolved. No one dared to stand up for the boy except Yuria. Now Annie wants to be friends with her. Leah talked a lot and fell asleep late. And finally, Yuria can break out of the room to see Leon. She walked quietly through the guild corridors to remain unnoticed. Leon met her on the street. He immediately noticed that the girl was dressed too lightly for the cool night. The deputy head of the guild carefully threw a cape over Yuri. The girl turned her attention to the garden. It was as beautiful as she remembered. She thought it had dried up a long time ago, but Leon had taken care of it. Yuria took the opportunity to ask why the emperor wanted to see Leon. Without thinking for a long time, he replied that it was all because of the hunting competition. Usually such competitions are held in early autumn, but this year everything is different. They are held in the middle of winter because it is a bee's labyrinth. It gets its name because the competitions are held in a maze. They are completely different from the usual ones that are held in forests or green areas. The prey is not an ordinary beast, but a terrible monster. The monsters live in the barren north and rarely enter private homes. That's why they were specially caught for competitions. For safety reasons, they will hunt low-level monsters and use magic weapons from the Cheshire Guild. That's why Kaishan called Leon. But Yuri doesn't understand why in the middle of the ball. The girl would also like to be present at the hunt. But it is organized only for influential families of the center. And Yuria does not fit in. Is there a chance she could still attend this event? Of course, if she receives an invitation from the emperor himself. However, this is unlikely. Leon also shocked Yuria by saying that Hekard Lukdam will arrive in the country within a month. This means that the girl needs to be careful not to run into Hekard. Annie took Yuria to the freezer warehouse. That's where she would spend her first day at work. The temperature in that room is maintained with the help of magic stones. Annie noticed that this was a business created by the owner of the guild. The owner is a living legend. The girl admires her very much and almost sang an ode in her honor. Annie also whispered a rumor to Yuria that the guild leader's beauty had won over Lords Phoenicis and Hekard. Although this is all untrue, the girl's attention was drawn to the noise coming from Manon. Annie asked Yuri not to interfere because the incident in the dining room had spread. When working in a warehouse, you have to leave the doors ajar. If they do close, it takes about an hour to open them again, and that's enough to freeze you. Most of the work in this warehouse involves finding the materials needed to craft magical tools. If you know the structure and location of the materials, it usually takes less than 20 minutes. Annie was supposed to find the necessary ingredients, while Uriah was supposed to study the structure. But the girl was called by another intern, saying that she had an urgent call from the head of Karen's. In order not to close the warehouse and then wait long again, Uriah offered her help in finding the ingredients. The Viscountess quickly got to work, but to Annie's great surprise, the manager wasn't looking for her. And then the puzzle came together. Someone had lied, and there was no doubt about it. When Annie returned, she found the door to the freezer locked. It had been done on purpose. A lot of people had already gathered at the door. Annie was blaming herself for everything, because if she hadn't left, Yuri wouldn't have been locked up in the warehouse. Something like this happened once before. A man froze to death. If this happens to Yuria, Annie won't be able to stand it. A moment later, the door opened. Annie froze in anticipation. Yuria came out safe and sound. Although her hands were quite cold, she found herself alone, in the freezer. And it was supposedly Yuria's fault, so she had to think about it internally. There is only one person who could say that. Karen, it's this scumbag's fault that the warehouse doors closed. He won't tolerate such humiliation towards himself when he himself mocks others. If Yuria wants to deal with this guy, she has to get out of here first. But it's too much for her body. Compared to her past, her body is now short and lacking in strength. But Yuria just has to open the door in another way, for example with a magic crystal connector. But if you touch one of them incorrectly, the chain will be broken, and all the magic crystals will be useless. Even the country's top repairmen prefer not to touch magical tools, but Uriah can do it. After all, it was she who created the crystal connector. Can't a developer solve his own code? However, Uriah is still a little worried, since a lot of time has passed. If she touches it incorrectly and the freezer breaks, Uriah will not limit herself to simply banishing her. She cannot be left without her noble property, because she will fall into debt again. The girl looked at the main and auxiliary crystals for a long time, trying to find the right one. Finally, she found the one responsible for opening and closing. It's been quite a while since I entered the warehouse. Perhaps that's why the ice magic crystal is using more power to maintain the temperature. Yuria's eyes continued to close inexorably. While trying to open the door, the Viscountess unexpectedly injured herself. She wouldn't be able to hold out for long, but she promised herself that this time she would survive. A lot has changed since the incident with the freezer. Karen was kicked out of the guild beforehand. Although he mocked his colleagues, in Yuri's case, it was already attempted murder. Karen was also kicked out of the house, calling him a disgrace to the family. In addition, there was another loud misunderstanding. Colleagues immediately began calling Yuri a monster. Many people didn't understand how the girl opened the door. From an indifferent mistress who was pushed through the cracks, she became a monster newcomer. Meanwhile, a month has passed since the pen manufacturing business with the Emperor began. Annie visited Yuria to make sure she was okay, because she still felt guilty. At the same time, the girl reported that Mr. Heckard had returned. Manager Karains was looking for Yuria. When she came at her husband's request, Heckard was already standing next to him. Heckard was an abandoned bastard. He came from the ruined royal family of Rookdam. Heckardu Rookdam, like Leon, was given a new life by the head of the Cheshire Guild. He is currently the branch director responsible for export trade, and he lives mostly abroad. Leon wondered why Heckard had returned without any communication. The man replied that soon, that day would come when the guild head disappeared. Every year around this time, Leon couldn't sleep because of guilt. But the guild leader returned in Yuria's body, so he forgot about it. Heckard shared that he had arrived in the country in a hurry and noticed something suspicious. In the Cheshire Guild, using the guild's technology, it seems they are creating and trading magical weapons. The guild leader has forbidden this since its founding. Apparently, they took advantage of the fact that this post is empty. Perhaps there was a leak in the workshop, so Heckard quietly returned to check everything. He needed to find the traitor. The man decided to start with the workshop. After the guild leader disappeared, Heckarth looked as if he had lost all emotion. The head was the only one who had stirred his feelings from the very beginning. If he met her again, he would return to his previous state. Leon wondered if they could go back to the times when there were three of them. But Yuria herself doesn't want this, and Leon hates that even more people will find out about this secret. The deputy head of the guild decided to give Hecard a subordinate to help him conduct the inspection. This subordinate became Yuria. Manager Karen's noted that the team in the workshop has been busy lately and cannot give a tour, so he asked her to do him a favor. This is a regular visit to the workshops that have a contract with the Cheshire Guild. This can be seen as an analog to the head office inspection of subcontractors. Yuria doesn't remember going on any excursions this time of year. If the internal rules haven't changed, then something must have happened. Yuria struggled to fasten her robe for a long time. Hecard noticed this and came over to help. The girl was surprised, so she silently watched his actions. He looked like a wolf to her. In the past, Hecard also had something of a beast. A wonderful beast that obeys well. Yuria almost patted him on the head, like she had done before. Hecard raised his head, and their eyes met. Yuria felt something strange. It had been so long. It had been so long since she had looked into his charming eyes. It seemed to the girl that Hecard had not been born with the eyes of the royal family of Rookdom. Yuria is glad that they can walk together so openly and not worry about being caught. But for some reason, she feels uneasy and uncomfortable. 1 hour is how long it takes to get from the guild to workshop number 1 on horseback. The owner of this place is known as the genius of the century. He is especially known for being difficult to deal with. But he wasn't named that for nothing. His skills were unsurpassed and known far beyond the borders of the empire. In terms of size, this workshop was the largest in the empire. The atmosphere here remained the same as the former head of the Cheshire Guild remembered. Hecard sternly asked his subordinate, Mr. Kiliton, who began to mumble something under his breath. But suddenly, a brilliant master appeared and saved the boy from Hecard's wrath.